Nobody warns you that the woman you're about to marry can lie so well. She makes the lie feel like love. I didn't figure it out all at once. It came to me in pieces, small, quiet pieces I kept finding reasons to excuse. Because I was 62 years old, twice widowed by disappointment in my own judgment, and for the first time in a decade, I was happy in a way that embarrassed me a little. Her name was Renata, and for 16 months, I believed she was the last good thing life was going to hand me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. For those of you just finding me, my name is Walter Kowalczyk. Friends call me Walt. I spent 38 years running a heating and cooling company out of Scranton, Pennsylvania. The kind of business my own father started in 1961 with one truck and a toolbox, and the kind I built into 6 trucks and a warehouse before I finally handed the keys to my son last spring. Money was never the point in our house growing up. Showing up was the point. My father used to say, a man's word and a man's family were the only 2 things worth having, because everything else could be repossessed. I'm Polish on both sides, 3rd generation in Lackawanna County, and Sunday dinners at my sister Bev's house have been mandatory since Eisenhower was president. My late wife, Carol, made pierogi from scratch every Christmas Eve until the cancer took her 4 years ago. And my daughter Marie has kept that tradition alive since, God love her, even though hers never quite come out right, and we all lie about it anyway. That's just how we love each other. Loudly, over food, with opinions nobody asked for. So when I tell you I met Renata at a charity gala for the county hospital, and that within 4 months I was completely gone on this woman, understand what that means coming from a man my age. I don't fall easy anymore. I'd been on exactly 2 dates since Carol passed, and both ended the same way, politely, quietly, 2 people realizing they wanted different things from whatever time they had left. Renata felt different from the first conversation. She walked into that ballroom in a green dress that probably cost more than my first truck, laughed at my brother-in-law's terrible joke about furnaces within 10 minutes of meeting him, and then turned to my sister Bev and asked her, genuinely asked her, not out of politeness for her stuffed cabbage recipe. Bev grabbed her by the arm and didn't let go for 40 minutes. I stood there watching it happen and thought, ah, so this is how it goes. We were together for 16 months. She met my family early. By month 2, she was at Sunday dinner. By month 4, she knew which chair was my brother-in-law Stan's, and never sat in it. My family took her, in the way families like mine take people in completely, loudly, with far too much food involved. I proposed on the overlook at Naog Park on a Tuesday evening in early fall. Ring, sunset, the whole thing. She said yes before I finished the sentence. My daughter cried when I called her. My son said, good, now bring her to Sunday dinner so Aunt Bev can feed her right. Even Stan, who trusts almost nobody, seemed to already know. To this day, I don't know how I managed to be that happy. Truly, completely happy. And I had no idea what was coming. Welcome back, friend. If you're new here, welcome for the first time. Get comfortable. This one's going to take you somewhere. Hit the like button and drop a comment telling me where you're listening from. I read every one of them, and trust me, you're going to want to be here for the ending. Here's what I need you to understand about Renata before anything else. She wasn't cold. She wasn't distant. She was warm, funny, quick with a joke, and she made me feel, constantly, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be at this stage of my life. So when the subject of her family came up, and it came up early, because in my world family comes up early, her answer didn't strike me as a red flag. It felt like an old wound. My parents and I don't speak. She told me one night. About 6 weeks in, we were on the couch in her condo in Clark Summit, takeout containers still on the coffee table, neither of us looking at the other. They were hard people when I was young, cold, controlling. I had to put a lot of distance between us, just to become who I am. I looked at her. She wasn't performing. Her eyes were steady, a little tired, the eyes of someone recalling something processed long ago, but saying it out loud still cost her something. I'm sorry, I said. What else can you say? She shrugged. It's just not something I talk about much. They won't be at the wedding. I need you to understand that. I told her it didn't matter to me, and I meant it, because I trusted her. She'd never given me a reason not to. What I hadn't fully accounted for was my own family. Not that they were hostile toward Renata, they weren't, not even close. But the Kowalczyk family runs on a particular frequency, and that frequency includes a deep need to know the people connected to the people we love. It's not curiosity, it's not judgment. We just believe you understand a person better once you know where they came from, who raised them, and whose table they sat at as a kid. By the 10th month of our engagement, the silence around Renata's family had started making its own kind of noise. It came to a head on a Sunday evening in late September. Bev had made her golubki, the real recipe, the one that takes most of Saturday to prepare. We were all around the table, me, Renata, Bev, Stan, my son Danny and his wife, my daughter Marie. Everything was normal until Stan, who has never once in his life considered the social consequences of a question, set down his fork and looked at Renata. "Renata, honey, I gotta ask you something." She smiled. "Sure, Stan. Where's your people?" The table went quiet the way a table goes quiet when somebody finally says the thing everyone's been carefully avoiding. Renata's smile stayed put, but her eyes drifted, just slightly. "My parents and I aren't in contact. I've mentioned that. I know you mentioned it. I'm asking about it." Stan wasn't being cruel. He was being Stan. Because in this family, and I say this with love, you don't marry into a family you've never met. It's not how we do things. "Stan," my voice, one low word. Stan picked his fork back up. But the question was already sitting on the table, and no amount of golubki was going to bury it. Later, after Renata had gone home, my sister found me in her kitchen. She poured herself a glass of wine and leaned against the counter. "She's a good woman," Bev said. Not a question, a statement. "She is. I trust her." Bev nodded slowly. "But Walt, we're going to be standing in a church, making promises in front of God and everybody we know, and we're going to do it without meeting a single person from her family. Her parents were toxic. She had a rough childhood. I believe her." Bev set her glass down. "I believe her too. But toxic people still exist somewhere, Walt. They have an address." She looked at me hard. "I'm not asking you to fix anything. I'm asking you to know what you're walking into." I didn't say anything. She patted my shoulder and went back to the dining room. I stood there in my sister's kitchen a long time. But here's what you need to understand. I still wasn't suspicious. Not of Renata, not really. If anything, I was worried about myself. Because the thought I couldn't shake, the one that kept surfacing on the drive back to Clark's Summit, was this. What if her parents look at a 62-year-old furnace repairman with grease still under his fingernails and decide I'm not what they wanted for their daughter? I know how that sounds, coming from a man who owns his own company and has a family like mine. But Renata moved in a specific world. Marketing director for a regional bank, a condo that looked like it came out of a magazine, friends who wore brands I had to look up. She carried herself with a kind of polish that I found attractive, but that sometimes, quietly, made me feel like I was too loud, too blue-collar, too much Stan's brother-in-law, and not enough anything else. What if her parents were the same? What if they had money? Standards, expectations I couldn't have guessed at. That was my real fear. Driving north on Route 6, the following Saturday morning, I wasn't expecting to uncover a lie. I wasn't expecting anything to be wrong. I thought I was going to meet intimidating people who might decide I wasn't good enough. Honestly, I thought I was the underdog in this story. I was going to show up, take whatever they gave me, and try to convince them I was the man their daughter had chosen. Finding her parents hadn't required a private investigator. Just a routine, tedious piece of paperwork. Renata had moved into a duplex I own on Green Ridge Street a year earlier, and with the wedding a few weeks out, my accountant needed her to formally re-sign the lease for tax purposes. It was sitting on my desk on a Friday afternoon when my office manager dropped off the processed documents. I looked down at the official ID she'd uploaded to the portal. Renata Marie Volkov, not Ashford. The name she used on social media and introduced to my friends. Volkov. Out of pure curiosity, I ran a quick property search under that name. A few clicks turned up an old public record, a Facebook profile untouched since college, and a home address on Birchwood Lane in a small town called Honesdale, about an hour north. That same evening I told Renata I had a property inspection scheduled. She kissed me goodbye without looking up from her laptop. The whole drive, I ran through introductions in my head, quietly dreading the moment someone would open a door and look at me like I wasn't what they had in mind. I got off the highway and into Honesdale just before 10 in the morning. I followed the GPS into a neighborhood of modest, well-kept houses, clean streets, American flags on porches, the kind of place where people know their neighbors by name. I slowed down. There it was, a tidy two-story, with a flower bed along the walkway and wind chimes on the porch. And in the front yard, moving slow with a garden hose, was an older man in a faded Phillies t-shirt, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, watering the flower bed with the patience of a man who had nowhere more important to be. This wasn't what I'd pictured. I sat in the car a full 5 minutes, recalibrating everything. No gate, no luxury car in the driveway. Nothing about this place suggested anyone here had spent 1 second worrying whether they were good enough for anything. These weren't intimidating people. These were ordinary, decent people. And for one clean, unmistakable second, I felt real relief. I got out and walked up the path. He noticed me when I was about 10 feet away and squinted the careful way people do when a stranger approaches. "Help you with something?" I stopped, took a breath. "Sir, you don't know me. My name is Walter Kowalczyk. I'm engaged to your daughter, Renata." Frank Volkov dropped the hose. Not fumbled it, dropped it, clean and total. Water ran slowly down the driveway while he stared at me, and his face did something I wasn't prepared for at all. It broke. Not with anger, not with suspicion, with relief. 2 years of stored-up pain finding somewhere to finally land. "Sandy." His voice cracked on her name. "Sandy, come out here." And right there, standing on the porch of a house in Honesdale, watching a retired mailman try to put himself back together, my whole understanding of the situation flipped over. Inside the Volkov house, everything I thought I knew about Renata started coming apart. Quietly, methodically, over coffee I hadn't asked for, and a plate of cookies Sandy served with shaking hands. The house was clean and modest, and completely full of Renata. School pictures, birthday photos, a prom picture on the mantel, a college graduation portrait where Frank and Sandy stood on either side of her, beaming, Frank's arm around her shoulders. Sandy's face, so proud, it almost hurt to look at. These weren't the faces of abusive people. These were the faces of parents who missed their daughter. The story came out carefully. Frank was a retired postal carrier, 29 years on the route. Sandy had worked as a school secretary in the Wayne County District for most of Renata's childhood. They'd helped put her through Penn State. Full scholarship, no debt to her parents, they'd been proud of that, deeply proud. When Renata moved to Scranton and started building her career, things shifted slowly. Calls got shorter, visits stopped. She started appearing in photos online under a different last name, Ashford, her middle name at events with people Frank and Sandy didn't recognize, wearing a version of herself they didn't quite recognize either. Then came the wedding conversation, the request for $80,000. Frank's counteroffer, heavy with disappointment, of $12,000 everything they could give without wrecking their retirement. Renata's response, "If you can't invest in my future, you're not part of it." Blocked that same night. Sandy slid something across the table, a sealed birthday card, never opened, stamped "Return to Sender" in red. Renata's handwriting on the return address label. Our address. I sat there, staring at that red stamp, and then slowly pulled my phone out of my pocket. I opened the text Renata had sent me the night before, the one I'd read right before falling asleep, the one that had prompted this whole trip. "Honey, I have wonderful news. I reached out to my parents. They finally apologized for everything and want to have lunch with you before the wedding. I'm so excited for you to finally meet them." The kitchen went very quiet. I looked up slowly. Frank and Sandy Volkov sat right across from me, completely unaware of the digital reality their daughter was constructing in real time. I turned the phone around and showed them the screen. Sandy read it. She set the phone down gently and didn't say anything. Frank looked out the kitchen window at the flower bed he'd been watering when I pulled up. I thought about the drive up, my rehearsed introductions, my quiet fear of not being good enough for these people. I almost laughed. I almost laughed because I'd spent weeks worrying Renata's parents would look down on me, that they'd be too polished, too demanding. And here they were in Honesdale, on Birchwood Lane, with wind chimes and a garden hose and 2 years of unopened birthday cards. The person who'd decided somebody wasn't good enough had never been them. It had been her. It had always been her. And just like that, the man who'd driven up Route 6 nervous about making a good impression, that man was gone. The man who drove back to Scranton that afternoon was thinking about something else entirely. The difference between a good liar and a great one is that the great one never breaks character. Not at the table, not when everything's falling apart. I didn't confront her that night. I want to be clear about that, because it matters. I got back to my place in Clark's Summit a little after 2, sat in the car 10 full minutes, and made a very deliberate decision. Not yet. Not because I was scared. Not because I doubted anything I'd just seen and heard in that kitchen. But because I'm my father's son, and my father taught me something about the moment right before a confrontation that most people get wrong. He used to say, "Walt, whoever reacts first almost never wins. Let them finish the lie. A half-told lie is just an argument. A fully told lie is a confession." I let myself into my house and stood in the doorway a moment. I could hear Renata's voicemail waiting on my machine, cheerful, asking about my day. I sat down at my kitchen table and did what I do when I'm working through something complicated. I separated what I knew from what I assumed, and I built a timeline. As far as I knew, Renata's real name was Volkov. Her parents were Frank and Sandy Volkov, of Honesdale, Pennsylvania. Alive, present, heartbroken. They hadn't abused her. They hadn't been controlling or toxic in any sense Renata had described, going by every photograph and every word in that house. They'd offered $12,000 toward the wedding, been told it wasn't enough, and been erased from her life that same night. As far as I knew, Renata had texted me while sitting in her parents' kitchen while I was sitting in her parents' kitchen, telling me those same parents had apologized and wanted to meet me for lunch, which meant she was already building the next floor of the lie. Which meant there was a next floor. Which meant there was someone she planned to bring to that lunch. Who? That was the question I was trying to answer before I fell asleep. I didn't have to wait long. Over the next several days, I paid attention differently. Not suspiciously. I was careful about that. I didn't check her phone. I didn't follow her. I just listened. The way you listen once you finally understand that every conversation has been running on 2 levels at once, and you've only ever been hearing one of them. I noticed she'd started mentioning her boss, more than usual. A man named Douglas Pierce. Douglas thinks, casually, that the Hargrove account might close soon. Apparently Diane Pierce had been at that same charity gala too. Small mentions, nothing alarming, the kind of thing a person drops into conversation when they're trying to get someone comfortable with a name before that name becomes important. She was breaking me in. She'd been doing it for weeks, and I'd never noticed. Douglas Pierce. I looked him up from my office the following Tuesday. Door closed. Senior vice president at the regional bank where Renata worked. His photo on the company site showed a man in his late 50s, silver hair, the kind of ease that only comes from decades of never having to justify yourself anywhere. His wife, Diane, turned up in a social column about a hospital fundraiser 2 years back. Polished, highlighted hair, the full picture. A wealthy, respectable couple. Exactly the kind of people you'd want at your side if you were trying to convince a tight-knit blue-collar family that you came from somewhere impressive. There they are. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the Pierce's corporate photo. That's when it hit me that Renata wasn't just a liar. She was trapped in a prison of her own enormous insecurity. She'd spent a decade reinventing herself in Scranton, adjusting her identity to climb a social ladder my family never cared about, but her banking friends clearly did. When her father declined to sacrifice his retirement for 1 day of theater, it wasn't just a financial disagreement to her. In her mind, his modesty threatened the polished illusion of success she'd sacrificed everything to build. To keep the lie alive, she hadn't just distanced herself from them. She'd had to erase them completely. And then I thought about what she must have told the Pierces to get them to agree to this. Because here's what I know about people like Douglas and Diane Pierce. They didn't get where they are by being careless. For Renata to get them to sit down at a lunch and present themselves as her parents, she had to have given them something that made sense. A coherent story. Something touching enough that two busy, important people would say yes without asking too many questions. What had she told them? I let it sit 2 days, and Thursday morning my phone buzzed with a calendar invite Renata had added to our shared account. Lunch, Douglas and Diane, at the Iron Gate, Saturday, 12:30. She'd added a note underneath. Can't wait for you to finally meet them, sweetheart. This means everything to me. I stared at that note a long while. Means everything to me. I thought about Sandy Volkov sliding a sealed birthday card across her kitchen table. I thought about Frank's face when he read that text over my shoulder. Yeah, I bet it does. That Thursday I called my son from the truck, engine running, parked outside the shop. He picked up on the second ring. I need to talk to you. Come by the house. 20 minutes later I was sitting at Danny's kitchen table in Dunmore, the same table where Renata had charmed his wife over coffee 8 months earlier. I laid it all out. Every piece: Honesdale, Frank and Sandy, the birthday card, the text, Douglas and Diane Pierce. Danny sat across from me, with his hands folded, and listened without interrupting once. When I finished, the kitchen went quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What do you need?" 4 words. That was it. No lecture, no "I told you so," no dramatic reaction. "I have to go to that lunch," I said. "And then I need to build something bigger." Danny nodded slowly. "And the Volkovs?" "I'm going back to Honesdale after the lunch. I want to know if they're willing to be part of what comes next." He looked at me. "And what comes next?" "A dinner," I said. "A real one. The right people in the room." Another pause. Then Danny stood up, straightened his shoulders, and said, "I'll call Aunt Bev about the hall." That was the whole conversation. Bev's reaction was a little less contained. She came in from the living room where she'd apparently been listening to the whole thing, which in our family isn't considered eavesdropping. It's just being present. She stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, and an expression I can only describe as the specific fury of a Polish woman who fed someone at her table and got lied to for her trouble. "That poor girl's mother," Bev said, "sent a birthday card that got returned unopened. I know people like that, Walt. Good people." "I know, Bev." She looked at me a long moment, then crossed the room and put both hands on my face, the same move she's used on me since I was 8 years old and needed her full attention. "You're fixing this," she said quietly. "Not just for you. For them too." Saturday came. The Iron Gate is exactly the kind of place where the lighting is designed to make everyone look a little more important than they actually are. Renata had made the reservation. As expected, I arrived 5 minutes early and sat facing the door. They walked in together, Renata in the middle, one hand tucked into Douglas Pierce's arm, Diane on her other side. Renata was glowing. Douglas moved with the ease of a man who'd never once questioned whether he belonged somewhere. Diane was all warm smiles and careful posture. I stood when they reached the table. Big smile. Firm handshake. "Mom. Dad," Renata said, her voice carrying a particular kind of triumph. "This is Douglas and Diane." Douglas. Diane. Not Frank. Not Sandy. I shook both their hands. "I've heard so much about you both." I hadn't, because they hadn't existed in this role until about a week earlier. We sat, opened menus, and for the next 20 minutes I watched Renata perform with a fluency that, under any other circumstances, would have genuinely impressed me. She laughed at Douglas's jokes half a beat too fast. She referenced shared memories with Diane. Trips, restaurants, family moments got mentioned, and Diane followed along carefully, like someone working from a script she'd only half memorized. Douglas was smoother. He asked me questions about the business, made informed comments about the HVAC market, generally behaved like a man who'd done his homework and was determined to be convincing. Everybody at that table was acting. The whole table was a stage, and I sat there eating a Cobb salad, being absolutely charming. "So, Douglas," I said, setting my fork down with the relaxed ease of a man without a single worry in the world. Renata's told me a lot about you. Clearly, you've had a real presence in her life. Douglas smiled. She's been like family to us. Like family. That's everything. That means so much to us, I said. I looked at Renata when I said it. She smiled back at me, radiant. Keep smiling, sweetheart. I'm going to be honest with you both, I continued, leaning in a little, the way I do in negotiations when I want somebody to feel like I'm letting them in on something. My family takes formal occasions seriously. My sister would never forgive me if we didn't do this the right way. I paused. We'd love to host an engagement dinner next Saturday. Nothing extravagant. Family, good food, a toast. My people just need to welcome the people who matter to Renata before we get to the altar. Douglas glanced at Diane, half a second of silent calculation. We'd be honored. Renata grabbed my hand under the table so fast I felt it in my shoulder. Perfect, I said. I smiled at her. She smiled back, full and radiant and triumphant. The smile of a woman who believes she's already won. The trap was already built. She just walked in smiling. If you've been with me a while, drop a comment. And while you're at it, hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed. Over the next 6 days, I moved carefully. Monday, I drove back to Honesdale. I called Frank from the driveway before I even knocked. He opened the door before I finished knocking. We sat in the same kitchen, same coffee, same table. I told them about the lunch, about Douglas and Diane, about the performance, about the engagement dinner I'd arranged. I told them I wanted them there. Sandy's hands went still around her mug. Walt, we don't want to cause a scene. Sandy, I looked at her directly. My sister is going to stand in that hall and welcome anyone who walks through those doors into our family. She deserves to know who she's really welcoming. I paused. And you've spent 2 years sending birthday cards that keep coming back unopened. You deserve to be in that room, not for drama, because you're her parents, and somebody has to say it out loud. Frank leaned forward and put his hand over Sandy's. He looked at me. What time should we be there? Tuesday, I sat with Danny and Stan in my garage and laid out every detail. Danny listened, asked 2 sharp questions, then said, I'll handle the hall. He picked up his phone, and that was that. Stan's reaction required immediate containment. I want to say something to her at the door, he growled, eyes narrowed. No, Stan. Not a word, I said, putting both hands on his shoulders. I need you to do something that's going to be the hardest thing you've ever done. Not one word until I stand up for the toast. He looked at the ceiling, then at Danny, who was biting the inside of his cheek. Fine, Stan finally hissed. But I want a double order of kielbasa before anybody sits down, and I'm holding the door on the way out. I looked at him and nodded. That I can arrange. Every piece was in place. The Polish-American Hall on Providence Road was Bev's choice, and it was right a place that felt like a home, not a stage set. Long tables, white linens, candles, warm light. Bev handled the menu herself and added a small framed photo of our parents to the welcome table, because in her words, they needed to be there too. Frank and Sandy Volkoff drove down from Honesdale Saturday morning and checked into a motel outside Scranton. Frank called me Thursday night to confirm. His voice was steady and careful, and at the end of the call, after we'd gone over the details, he said quietly, Walt, whatever happens tomorrow in that room, thank you for coming up to Honesdale, for knocking on that door. A pause. She chose well, even if she doesn't know it yet. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just told him, see you tomorrow, Frank. I pressed my shirt Friday night. I got into bed next to Renata, already asleep, already dreaming of whatever version of tomorrow she'd built in her head. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, thinking about a man in a Phillies t-shirt watering a flower bed on Birchwood Lane, a sealed birthday card with a red stamp on the front, a kitchen table where 2 people had been quietly waiting 2 years for somebody to finally show up. Somebody was showing up tomorrow. So were they. You can build a lie as tall as you want, but the moment the right people walk through the door, the whole thing comes down. That Saturday morning, I woke up with a stillness that doesn't come from peace. It comes from certainty. I lay there a few minutes listening to Renata in the bathroom, the shower, the hairdryer, the particular rhythm of a woman preparing for a performance she believes she's already won. And I thought about Frank Volkov ironing his one good sport coat in a motel room outside Scranton. Sandy in front of a mirror, trying to hold herself together. Two people who'd driven an hour down Route 6 for a dinner their own daughter had no idea they'd been invited to. Get up, Walt. Let's finish this. Renata took 3 hours to get ready. 3 hours. I sat in the living room watching the news with the volume low and let her have every minute of it. She came out twice to ask my opinion, once about earrings, once about shoes, and both times I told her she looked beautiful, because she did. That was never the problem. The problem was everything hiding underneath the beauty. She wanted to leave early to check the setup. I told her to go ahead, that I had one quick call to make and would meet her there. She kissed my cheek, grabbed her coat, and walked out the door like everything in her life was perfectly arranged. The second the door closed, I picked up the phone and called Frank. He answered on the first ring. "You doing okay?" I asked. "We're ready." His voice was calm, steady, the voice of a man who'd made peace with a decision. "Sandy's dressed." "Good. When I text you, you come in. Doesn't matter what's happening at the table. You just walk in and stand there. You don't have to say a word." A pause. "Walt." "Yeah? She's going to see you the second that door opens." "I know. I just want you prepared." A shorter pause. "I've been preparing for 2 years. I've been ready since the night she blocked us. I've been ready every birthday since, when the phone never rang." Another pause, shorter still. "We'll be there." I held the phone a second after he hung up. Then I put on my jacket, checked the ring box in my inside pocket, and walked out the door. The Polish-American hall on a Saturday night is exactly what it should be. Warm, familiar, the smell of butter and dill greeting you at the door like an old friend. But the private room in the back runs on a different frequency. Quieter, more intentional, white tablecloths, low lighting, round tables, arranged so everyone can see everyone else. Bev had been there since 4 o'clock. When I walked in at 6:30, she was adjusting the centerpieces with the focused energy of a woman who understands that the details of a room tell people how seriously you're taking them. She looked up when I came in and studied my face, the way she has since I was old enough to have something to hide. "You okay?" "I'm fine, Bev." "You sure?" "I'm sure." She crossed the room and put both hands on my face. Looked at me a long moment. Mom used to say the truth always finds the most uncomfortable place to sit down, even when nobody invited it. She straightened my collar. "Let it sit tonight." I nearly lost it right there. Danny stood near the bar in his good gray suit, talking to Stan, completely composed. He nodded once when I walked over. "Everything's ready. The room's set. Do what you need to do." Stan sat at a side table with a plate stacked high with kielbasa, wearing the focused expression of a man honoring a solemn obligation. He caught my eye, pointed at the plate, then pointed at me, his version of, "I held up my end. Don't forget yours." I almost smiled. They arrived at 7. I heard Renata's laugh in the hallway before the door even opened, that particular social laugh, half a note higher than her real one, the one she uses when she wants a room to feel like a party before she's even walked into it. She came in first. Navy dress, hair perfect, every detail exact. Douglas Pierce followed, silver-haired, expensive suit, moving with the natural authority of a man who has never doubted his right to be anywhere. Diane beside him, elegant, pearls at her collarbone. Renata moved through that room like she owned it. She kissed Bev on both cheeks, shook Danny's hand with both of hers, laughed at something Diane said near the bar and touched her arm warmly. She was magnificent. Genuinely, terrifyingly magnificent. When she reached my side, she looped her arm through mine and leaned in close. "This is perfect," she whispered. "Your family is amazing. This is everything I wanted." "I know," I said. "That's why I did it." She heard a compliment. I meant something else entirely. We sat. Food came out. Roast chicken, pierogi, kielbasa, a spread Bev had personally designed, bread arriving warm in a cloth-wrapped basket. The table filled with the warm noise of a real family dinner. Douglas was gracious and attentive, asking Danny about the business with what looked like genuine interest. Diane complimented Bev on the haul, and Bev accepted the compliment graciously while privately thinking things I'll never fully know. Renata was glowing, relaxed, victorious. I ate. I laughed at the right moments. I refilled glasses, asked questions, and to any outside eye, I was a completely relaxed man, enjoying a family dinner. My phone sat face down in my jacket pocket. There was a text I needed to send. I was waiting for the right moment. That moment came at 7:52, in the brief lull between the main course and whatever was supposed to come next. The table was warm, the wine was flowing, and Renata was laughing at something Douglas had said. I pulled up my phone and typed one word to Frank. Then I stood, tapped a fork against my glass, that clean, clear sound that tells a room, stop, listen. The table went still. Renata looked up at me with that full, radiant smile, the smile of a woman who thinks the next 60 seconds are going to be a toast about how much he loves her. I let the silence stretch a moment longer than felt comfortable. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. My voice was calm, measured, the way my father used to speak when something really mattered in our family. A dinner like this isn't just a nice evening. It's a statement. It's us saying, these people are real. These people matter. We don't say that lightly. I looked slowly around the table. My father taught me that the people you invite into a moment like this tell you exactly who you are. I paused. So I want to make sure tonight we have the right people at this table. I looked toward Tony, the hall manager, standing near the back wall. He'd been briefed. He knew his cue. He walked to the side door and opened it. And then Frank and Sandy Volkov walked in. Frank in his navy sport coat, the one that didn't fit quite the way it used to, the kind you could tell he'd had for years and saved for occasions that mattered. Sandy in a burgundy dress, a small purse held with both hands, chin up, moving with the quiet dignity of a woman who had decided she was not going to fall apart in public, no matter what happened next. They crossed into the silence of that room, and Renata saw them. I was watching her face. I'd positioned myself specifically to watch her face. The color drained like a tide pulling back, fast, complete, total. Her lips parted. Her hand, the one holding her wine glass, went completely still. The glass tipped. I reached over without looking at her and steadied it, set it down carefully on the linen. She turned to me. Her eyes were running the fast calculation of someone searching for the story that saves her. I could watch it happening in real time. The search for an exit, an angle, a version of this she could still control. Walt. Her voice came out thin, almost nothing. I went to Honesdale, I said quietly, not loudly. I wasn't performing for the room. 3 weeks ago, I drove up Route 6 on a Saturday morning because I told myself, maybe I can fix this for her. Maybe I can give her family back as a wedding gift. I let that land. I found a man watering his garden on Birchwood Lane in a Phillies t-shirt. I told him my name, and he dropped the hose. The room had gone tense. Renata, your father spent 29 years delivering mail. Your mother worked as a school secretary for most of your childhood. They put you through Penn State, and they did it without you owing them a single dollar of debt, because they wanted you to have everything. My voice stayed even, steady. They offered you $12,000 from their retirement, and you told them if they couldn't fund your life, they didn't exist in it. Her mouth opened. You don't understand everything that happened. I sat in their kitchen, I said quietly, like a door closing. I saw your school pictures on the refrigerator. I held the birthday card you mailed to our address, unopened. And while I was sitting there, you texted me telling me your parents had apologized and wanted to have lunch. I turned to Douglas and Diane Pierce. Diane had both hands flat on the table in front of her, her face completely pale. Douglas had gone still. Douglas. Diane. My voice shifted into something quiet and respectful. I know exactly what she told you. That my family was deeply prejudiced, that her real parents had passed away years ago, and she asked you to act as her honorary family so she wouldn't have to face a traditional working-class wedding alone. She used your kindness and your standing as a weapon to fill 2 empty chairs on a stage. I gestured toward Frank and Sandy, standing near the door. But those are her real parents. Diane looked at Renata, one long, unhurried look, the kind that doesn't need words because words would be insufficient anyway. Then she looked at Frank and Sandy, and something crossed her face that was far worse than anger. Recognition. The specific recognition of a woman who has just understood that the person she thought she knew doesn't exist. Douglas didn't say anything. He folded his napkin, set it on the table, the gesture of a man leaving who has decided there is nothing left worth saying. I turned to Renata one last time. She'd stopped looking for the exit. There wasn't one, and she knew it. She just looked at me, eyes bright, jaw tight. The entire architecture of everything she'd built was reflected in every face in that room. I grew up watching my father treat everyone, like they mattered. The man who parks the cars, the woman who cleans the office, the retired mailman in Honesdale who gave everything and was told it wasn't enough. I reached into my jacket pocket. That's the measure I was raised on, not the address, not the job title, not the clothes. I looked at her. By that measure, I don't know who you are. I took the ring out of my pocket and set it on the white linen tablecloth in front of her. Not thrown, not dramatic, just placed, quietly. The way you set something down when you've been carrying it too long and you're finally ready to put it down for good. Then I picked up the flower centerpiece from our table. White flowers, simple, Bev's choice. And I crossed the room to where Sandy Volkov was standing. She was fighting it. You could see the effort in her jaw, her shoulders, the way she was breathing, short and careful, the way people breathe when they're holding something enormous and can't afford to let it drop in public. I held out the flowers. She looked at them, looked at me, then looked at Frank, who'd driven an hour down Route 6, wearing his best dress, chin held high through the hardest walk of her life. She took the flowers and came apart completely. Not a scream, a quiet sound. The kind that comes after 2 years of stored-up grief, finally finding somewhere to go. Frank had his arm around her before the first sound made it out. His jaw was tight, his eyes wet, his chin steady. He pulled her close and looked at me over her head. Then, he did something I didn't expect. He stepped forward. One step. Sandy still tucked under his arm, and he extended his free hand. I shook it. He gripped it hard, the grip of a man saying something his voice still couldn't fully manage. I held it a moment, then stepped back. My father was suddenly beside me. I don't know exactly when he'd moved. Stanley Kowalczyk shows up when it matters. That's just what he does. He looked at Frank Volkov a moment. Then he stepped forward and offered his hand. "I'm Stanley," he said. "I should have met you a long time ago. I'm sorry." Frank shook his hand, swallowed once. "Frank," a breath. "Thank you for raising a man like this." My father glanced sideways at me. Just for a second. Just long enough. In 62 years. I'd never seen him that proud. Bev didn't shake Sandy's hand. She pulled her into a full hug. Both arms. Immediate. Unconditional. The way Polish mothers hold on to whoever needs holding. Sandy held on. The flowers were still in her hands. We walked out together, my father and the Volkovs. Bev's arm looped through Sandy's. My father and Frank walked side by side with the quiet ease of two men who'd just recognized something rare in each other. Danny holding doors. Stan bringing up the rear. Stan stopped at the main door and looked back once. I looked back too. Renata was sitting at the center of that table, in her perfect dress, in her perfectly constructed life. The ring on the linen in front of her, the centerpiece gone. Douglas and Diane Pierce stood near the back of the room. Diane already had her coat on. Douglas had his hand on her back, and neither of them looked at Renata as they moved toward the exit. Her friends, the polished circle she'd built, the one she'd performed for and constructed her entire second identity around, sat frozen in their chairs, with the particular discomfort of people who've just witnessed something they can't unsee and don't know what to do with their hands. Nobody went to her. Nobody pulled her aside. Nobody offered a version of events that made her look better. Nobody played the part she needed because there were no more parts available. The whole cast had walked out. She just sat there, finally, irreversibly, seen. Stan looked at her a long moment, shook his head once, slow, almost sad, and let the door close behind him. Outside on the sidewalk, the cool, clean air of a Scranton September, downtown, moved around us like it had no idea what had just happened inside that hall. I stood next to my father and took a deep breath. He put his hand on the back of my neck, something he's done since I was a boy. He didn't say anything for a moment. Your mother would have done the same thing. That was it. That was all he said. Across the sidewalk, Frank Volkov looked out at the Scranton skyline with Sandy tucked under his arm, the white flowers still in her hands. Both of them breathing the same cool September air like people who'd just gotten back something they'd stopped hoping to see again. Frank caught me watching. He nodded once. Not a thank you. Something there wasn't a word for. I nodded back. Some deals close for profit. Some you close because there's no version of yourself you can live with if you walk away from the table. I closed the most important deal of my life that night, and I didn't make $1 off it. Some women lie to erase the people who love them. She built an entire life on that eraser. And on a Saturday night in September, in the back room of the Polish-American Hall in Scranton, every floor of it came down. If this one hit home for you, hit that like button, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I'll see you in the next one.